Welcome back to another Crystal Light Kids radio show with your host Natalie Marie-Hart. Today we have a special guest by the name of Popeye from federaljack.com. He has an alternative radio show called Down the Rabbit Hole, and the show is an eye-opener. You could go on his website, federaljack.com, and listen to his archives that have endless of information. Popeye has inspired me to learn more about what really happened to the Titanic. Tonight's show we will be talking about that. The Titanic sank off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada on April 15, 1912, after colliding with an iceberg on her first voyage. The sinking of the Titanic caused the deaths of 1,517 people. It is the most celebrated maritime disaster in history. She was the largest ship afloat at that time. Popeye has a lot of great information about this big event, but he has talked about it on his broadcast. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to have someone like Popeye tonight.
Hello Popeye, how are you doing today?
Hi Natalie, how are you?
I'm doing just wonderful.
It's a pleasure to be on your broadcast. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on to my radio show.
Could you tell my audience how you began your radio show?
Sure. I have my website, federaljack.com, and I was doing my website for about, I'd say about 4 years at the time, 4.5 years, and I had been on a few different radio broadcasts, Jack Blood and a few other hosts, Alex Jones and stuff, and I had been a guest on a couple of these broadcasts, and every time I'd been on, people kept saying, man, you do such a good job, you should have your own radio show. And I didn't know anything about internet broadcasting or anything at the time, so the more I looked into it, looked appealing to me, and I ended up meeting a friend of mine who's a radio show host, and he invited me to come on and kind of be like a co-host with him, and within about a month, the owner of the network said, hey, do you want your own radio show? And then it kind of just snowballed from there into what it is today. I started off originally with 1 day a week doing Sundays, 2 hours on a Sunday, and now I do, I'm live 4 days a week, and I'm on 6 days a week, live 4, and then 2 are rebroads. So it's amazing how it snowballs.
That's wonderful. Was the sinking of the Titanic done on purpose?
I would say yes. From my research, without a doubt, it was definitely done on purpose. The reason is kind of a twofold reason, which when you start to research into conspiracies and things of that nature, you realize that just like with 9/11 or anything else, an event of this nature, there's not just one way that the powers that shouldn't be, the people behind it, benefit. There's usually multiple ways they benefit, and it's the same way with the sinking of the Titanic.
Was the Titanic in good shape for her voyage?
It's an interesting question, the way you pose that. The Titanic was in very good shape. The ship known as the Titanic was not in good shape at all. And that gets a little deeper into why the ship was sunk. And what I mean by that is, the ship we know as the Titanic is really the Olympic, or was really the Olympic, the sister ship of the Titanic, which was damaged in an earlier accident and was rendered uninsurable. And when you look into it, the evidence points that they switched the ship names out, and the ship that went underway as the Titanic was actually the Olympic. So technically, there's two answers to your question. On a technicality, it would be no, the Titanic really didn't go out to sea, and yes, she was seaworthy. But to answer it on a face level, was the ship as we know as the Titanic, seaworthy, then no, it was not. It was heavily damaged. The keel was bent. There was a patch inside of her hull to make sure seawater wouldn't get in, because there was a huge hole inside the hull of the ship. So no, the ship that we know as the Titanic that set sail that day was not seaworthy at all.
Do you think the sinking of a Titanic was an inside job?
Yes, and the term inside job kind of gets overused. I guess it's kind of like it's more of a marketing ploy, but yes, you are correct when you say that it was an inside job. In this case, it technically exactly was an inside job, because the owner of the ship had something to do with it, with the demise of the ship, we'll say. And the owners of the ship were the White Star Line. And when you look into who owned the White Star Line, at the time it was none other than J.P. Morgan.
Mm-hmm. What was the purpose of killing so many innocent people?
Well, in the research I've done into it, I don't really think that Captain Smith realized that many people were going to die. At least he thought that the people were going to be rescued. Mm-hmm. The evidence shows that he was trying to, because they didn't hit an iceberg. It was actually, they hit a smaller iceberg, but what they were headed for was this huge ice shelf. So he was trying to park the ship up on this ice shelf, and then they would get the people off onto the ice and then have them rescued off of the ice, and then they would be, whisked away to safety. That was the original plans. When you start to look into it and you have to look into it really deep to figure this out. But on another level, look at 9/11, or look at the Oklahoma City bombing, or in cases where that even in Afghanistan today, when we do a drone strike, when they want to hit one supposed terrorist, right? They'll hit a wedding and they'll kill 150 people at the wedding for one person. And the other 149, the government could say, oh, well, they were terrorists. But when it comes out, they weren't. The 149 of them were innocent people that were just at a wedding celebrating someone's marriage, the marriage of two people. And in comes a 2,000-pound JDAM and wipes everybody out. So they really don't have a problem with collateral damage. And to them, the end justifies the means. So it doesn't matter. If they have to kill 3,000 people, they have to kill 3,000 people. And to be quite honest, on the more sinister and scary side of it, these people do practice in. We'll keep it on the light side for the younger audience. They practice dark occult practices like Satanism, we'll say, and it wouldn't be anything against what they believe in to sacrifice people too. And I know it sounds very crazy for a lot of the listeners that might listen to your broadcast to hear that, because, oh my God, this guy's saying that they would sacrifice people and it's part of some sort of religion or whatever they believe in. I know it sounds crazy, but there are cults out there, right? People have seen satanic cults, and it whenever you watch it in the movies or something, it always turns out the police chief or some attorneys in town and perhaps the town prosecutor or whatever, they're involved. So why is it a surprise to find out that happens in real life as well? So yes, there are bad people out there that will have no second thought about killing 3,000 or 4,000 innocent people just to get 3 or 4 people to stop because something as big as the Federal Reserve, if you wanted to stop the Federal Reserve from being formed, right, or if you wanted to stop it from not being formed, I should say. If you want your plans of a Federal Reserve System to go forward, and look what we have today, right, in the United States, if you want that to go forward and there's certain people that are going to be standing in the way and won't let that happen, what better of a way than to put them on a ship and sink it and kill them? And if a couple thousand people die as a result, so be it. They can chalk it up to some sort of sacrifice, and the event did take place. There are a couple times of the year where there are rituals that the powers that shouldn't be believe in and partake in, and this is around that period of time that happened. It's around the same time that President Lincoln was assassinated too. Not the same year, but that same time frame, in that month. And a lot of these major events, Oklahoma City, all these things seem to happen around these certain dates in that month. So it's very interesting that you have major events like this happening throughout the course of time, and over a period of even 100 years or more. You start to look at this stuff and you see the dates, and all around the same dates are all these major events. Does that sound like a coincidence, or does that sound like there's a pattern?
It sounds like a pattern.
Yep, you got it.
There was a book called The Wreck of the Titan, published 14 years before the Titanic sank, by Morgan Robertson, retired Merchant Navy officer. What I find so amazing about the Titan versus the Titanic, they were both supposedly unsinkable British liners that were both heading to New York with 3,000 passengers on board. They both struck icebergs in the North Atlantic and sank, with many people losing their lives because of the shortage of lifeboats. Don't you think this man was either a great psychic, or did he have some inside information? If that doesn't smell like rotten fish, I don't know what does.
I agree. And the book, it's like some of these other events. Look at, again, going back, 9/11 is a good example because there's a lot of things that mimic here. It's almost like they use the same playbook, which they do. They use the same basic playbook, and then they tweak it for whatever event they're doing. But if you look at 9/11, about 8 or 9 months before 9/11 occurred, there was a show called The Lone Gunman series, which was a spinoff of The X-Files. And their pilot episode was an airliner being hijacked by a rogue element of the United States government and remotely flown into the World Trade Center in order to start a war in the Middle East. So that way they could have, basically it was a fundraiser for the military-industrial complex. So that way that they could, the war would cause, all this military spending, and all these guys would make all sorts of money. And then 9 months later, you have that exact scenario unfold. So, in that case, the guy who wrote the X-Files, I forget his name, it's Chris Carter. He admitted later on that the CIA, and I think it was Dean Haglund, who was one of the actors that might have actually let this cat out of the bag, but Chris Carter I know he's confirmed this, that Langley, a lot of the scripts, and that script in particular for that episode, came out of Langley, Virginia, which is CIA headquarters. So, there you go. Is that predictive programming? Perhaps. Maybe they were trying to put the idea in people's heads ahead of time for the event that they already knew was going to take place. So with Morgan Robertson, was he doing the same thing? Oh, good. He died a very mysterious death. Mm-hmm. He was poisoned.
Yeah.
So what did he know? To me, if it wasn't a planned event that far out, which from the investigation I've done into the insurance fraud aspect of it, mm-hmm. It doesn't. I don't know if it would be considered predictive programming in this sense, or if it was more of that book was written and perhaps the people that own the White Star Line knew about the book, and whoever set it on its course, perhaps they used that kind of a basis or an idea. That one still does. That's actually one question that still kind of perplexes me. I'm actually glad you brought that up. Not many people are on point enough to pick up the similarities between the two events. Not many people even realize that there was a book called Futility Wreck of the Titan. So that's a good catch on your part.
Thank you.
There were 10 well-known people who were supposed to be aboard the Titanic, but suddenly they changed their minds. And the biggest fish that didn't board his own ship was J.P. Morgan, the man who destroyed Nikola Tesla's life and free energy. J.P. Morgan missed the boat. Let's not forget the smaller fish who missed the boat, like Marconi, the man who stole Tesla's ideas. There were so many other individuals that missed their boat that day. Something smells like rotten fish to me.
Yeah, it smells like rotten fish to me. And again, you're right. That's a very good point that you picked out. And another thing that not many people know about the Titanic is J.P. Morgan was actually supposed to sail on the Titanic, and the people that he had invited on the Titanic, like Astor, John Jacob Astor, he had literally invited them on, and hey, come on, they all know each other, those circles, the elites, or elitists, I should say, because calling them elites makes them actually sound elite, and they're not, but these elitists, and they all hobnob, in the same circles. So a lot of these people were invited on personally by J.P. Morgan, and then the very last minute, he bails out because he's supposedly too sick, and then if my memory serves me correctly, they found him in Paris, like a day or two after the wreck, with one of his mistresses. So for somebody who was so sick he couldn't get aboard the ship, suddenly he's okay enough to be with his mistress in another city. So it reeks. It really reeks. Seeing people, jump off like that at the last minute. Hey, Marconi, don't go on the ship. Again, there's a lot of things that if it mirrors 9/11. Larry Silverstein, the guy that owned the World Trade Center complex, he usually ate breakfast at Windows of the World in the morning. He conveniently missed his breakfast that morning because he had a doctor's appointment. That's where he got the nickname Lucky Larry Silverstein. So you see the same thing over and over again. When it's the same type of pattern over and over again, could it be that it's just coincidental that these type of things keep repeating themselves, or could there be the dreaded C word, Natalie? Could there be a conspiracy?
There could be a conspiracy. Could you tell my audience about the captain of the Titanic? Why did the captain take his time to make a decision to save the passengers on the ship? Doesn't that smell fishy, Popeye?
Yes, it does. And that just goes to show that there was obviously some sort of plan going on behind the scenes, that the captain knew more. And at first, the first broadcast I did on this, because I've done a couple broadcasts about the Titanic.
Yes.
And the first one that my friend Steve and I did, and we put all the information out there, we had come at it from the angle that perhaps Captain Smith, because he was a Jesuit, and that's a whole different broadcast in its own right, but they have a very blood-curdling oath that most people would find, wow, that would surprising to say the least. Anyway, they're very devout to their cause, we'll say. So there was some strangeness with one of the higher-ranking members of the Jesuit order coming on board the ship at the very last port call before they set sail into destiny. And there were a lot of weird, strange things that happened also during that port call, like the one guy with the set of keys to the Big Eyes left the ship. Now, for people that don't know what Big Eyes are what I was a sailor, so I still use my old military terminology. Big Eyes are the huge binoculars that sailors use to be able to see miles out, so they can check for things on the horizons, any obstacles that they might hit. Well, there was a box that was locked up that had these things kept on board, and the only guy with the key left. Now, that's very shady in itself. And then when you research that there was a lot of crew that got off, and at the time that's odd because people needed work, and there was a coal strike going on. There was a lot of people. There were people that really could have used the work, and yet these guys didn't want to be on board that ship. A lot of the workers got off, the people that normally would have sailed, and that knew that ship. And a lot of them have made mention that it might have been the Olympic, and that's why they didn't want to go on, because they knew the Olympic was damaged. So when we had looked into this at first, I said, well, maybe Captain Smith was a hardcore evil Jesuit, and he was going to take them down, and he didn't care. But the more I looked into the insurance fraud aspect of it, I realized that at least to a certain extent, Smith was used. He was more of a useful idiot, we call them today. And that's because when you look into Smith's background, he was kind of a drunkard, and he had already damaged the Olympic. He had caused the White Star Line some major problems. He already owed them because he had damaged the Olympic, and he was still a captain. He still had his job. So he was kind of, now that he had done this damage, he was going to be a company man. They kind of owned him, right? So you have that hanging over your head. You're a Jesuit who's taken this loyal Jesuit oath to the order and to die, if you have to. So you have that hanging over your head. But I still don't think that he went in there with this murderous intention of killing everybody and he didn't care. I think he hesitated because he really thought that the people of that ship were going to be rescued. And that's when you look into the Captain Lord and the I forget the name of the vessel that came to his that Lord was the captain of. But when you look it up, he was actually the guy that ended up catching most of the blame in the trials that came out afterwards, because he had hesitated and waited to go over and rescue them, and all this, and that leads to, again, if he waited so long, why did he wait so long to, put the lifeboats in the water and start getting people out of there? Why did they hesitate? Well, then he must have thought someone was going to come rescue them. And when you look into the fact that there was actually another ship that was 19 miles away, out in the middle of nowhere, just parked in the middle of the ocean, that happened to be 19 miles away. Why are they parked out there? So then, was there a bigger plan? And you look further into it and you realize that he was headed for this huge ice shelf, and that the evidence supports the theory that he was going to park it up on the ice shelf, the front of the ship, because the ship would have survived a direct hit. It was built to. That's why they're built like that. It would have survived a direct hit. Wouldn't have been a big deal. What was a big deal was when it hit the side and it popped holes in the rivet, it popped holes in the plate, and then the rivets gave way, and then the seawater came in, hit the boilers, created explosions that caused bigger problems. So there's enough evidence to show he was going to park it up on the ice shelf, and that they were going to have the passengers get off on the ice, and then they would have the other ship, captained by Stanley Lord, come over, park by the iceberg or the ice shelf, and bring him on board and rescue everybody, and then the ship would have been sunk. They would have got the insurance money for the ship, right? And everybody would have been happy. That's what he thought. But what if that wasn't the only motive? What if not only did they know they were going to sink the ship, but now they can get a twofer? Now they can kill these individuals that they want out of the way, that aren't playing ball. So I don't think that Smith realized the full extent of what was going on. I think after a certain period of time he did, and that's when the rest of the events played out the way they did, and then the lifeboats started getting thrown into the water and everything else. But I really don't think that now, from the research I've done, I've changed my position a little bit. I mean, I know he was in on it without a shadow of a doubt, but I think even to a certain extent Smith was lied to about the overall agenda and end game. I don't think he realized that everybody was going to die. I think he realized, or as many people that died did, I think he realized, or he thought, that all the people would be saved, and that just the ship would go down and everything would be hunky-dory and it would be all a happy ending and yay, Captain Smith, you saved everybody. So I think to a certain extent he was a useful idiot.
J.P. Morgan invited John Jacob Astor, and then J.P. Morgan did not show up. And you know what is really strange? J.P. Morgan puts a large insurance policy on the Titanic after he misses his boat. Why would he do such a thing like that?
Good question. Why would you miss the ship if you have all these people coming on? It's the maiden voyage. From what I remember correctly, I believe his bathroom, he had a bathtub that was lined with gold or something, or a gold bathtub, or a gold toilet or something like that, if I remember correctly. Like, his stateroom was the top notch. You couldn't get any better than that stateroom. Literally, it was built for him. And that's a big red flag. If there's this huge maiden voyage of the ship, all these rich people are going on, and suddenly I'm too sick to come in today. That sounds like the dog ate my homework.
I have another theory. What about if it never hit an iceberg and there was a bomb on board? Maybe that is why the ship split in two? I have never heard of any ocean liners splitting in two when they sank. What do you think as a former Marine?
Well, the ship, that's actually a really intriguing question, and there was an explosion on board the ship. The Olympic itself had a weakened keel. It was twisted, and the keel is kind of like the backbone of the ship. So it was already weakened, and they had shored up the ship inside a little bit here and there, but it was still twisted, and that puts a certain amount of stress on the keel. So, and the keel is once the keel snapped, that's why the rest of the ship went, because the keel is literally what holds the rest of the ship together. Once the keel goes, that's like breaking your back. Then the only thing holding the ship together now is all those steel plates and the decks and stuff, and that stuff isn't meant to hold weight. And it flexes. It's meant to kind of flex and be flexible so when the ship rocks and rolls. So that stuff isn't really weight bearing, and then you have rivets popping, and then the inevitable ship tears in half. So back to your question of the ship ripping in two, and was there an explosion? Well, yes. First of all, there was an explosion. There's evidence. There's a guy named Patty the Pig. I think he's dead now, but he was he was a drunk, and I believe it was the late 60s, early 70s. He started talking about how there was an explosion on the Titanic and that there was insurance foul play and this and that, and a lot of people blew off what he had to say. But when Ballard went down and they found the Titanic, the video imagery showed that there was indeed a blowout where Patty the Pig had said that there was an explosion in one of the forward compartments of the ship, where he had said there was a coal fire on board the ship, and that had been smoldering since before they left. So that's another indicator of perhaps some forethought and foreplanning here, pre-planning for a disaster. And for people that don't understand why that would be a disaster, they used coal burning boilers at sea, and back in the day, everything was coal burning back then. So all these ships, the Titanic had these big coal-fired furnaces, and these guys would just shovel coal into these furnaces all day. That was their job. And when they had protocol that, in fact, in the movie The Titanic, you'll see when the water is coming in, you see these guys, they're all they're slamming these huge iron doors on the furnaces, and they're trying to slam these huge iron doors to the furnace rooms itself. It's because if seawater hits those boilers, they explode, and the explosive force is pretty powerful. In fact, a good example of this is if you go watch on YouTube, you can see this. You'll see footage of old trains, like back in the 1800s, the late 1800s, early 1900s. Like you'd have like a steam-powered locomotive, and the thing would crash, and there'd be a huge explosion, and all the engineers would die, and the first 3 cars of the train would be eradicated. It's because they were coal-fired furnaces. It's the same theory as what they did with the Titanic, and the same way they propelled it. So when they had an accident, same thing, but boom. Well, if you get cold seawater rushing into these furnaces, you have the same effect. So if you have a whole coal bunker, which is, picture on the Titanic, they were pretty huge. Picture like a bunker. It's kind of underneath. They were these storage areas, we'll say, and that's where they loaded just mountains and mountains of coal, 20 feet high, 15, 20 feet high piles of coal, huge. And they would go in there, they'd go and scoop out whatever, and they would level it out, they'd fill it out so it didn't overflow or whatever. And they had a bunch of the coal bunkers, and I remember exactly how high the pile of coal was, but you get my drift. So they would go in there, and then they would fill up whatever container it was that they used to transport it into the furnace room, and then they would feed it into the coal-fired furnaces. Well, if there's a fire inside smoldering in there, and you hit an iceberg, and those plates fail, and the rivets fail, because that's what happened. The rivets were subpar rivets, and they knew that. And they already knew that that thing, besides using garbage material, now you've also got the problem of the fact that this ship, which was let's just say it's the Olympic, it's not the Titanic, it's already got a twisted keel, there's already pressure and stuff on it. You hit the iceberg, these rivets fail, the plates pop off, pop, 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 water rushes in. Well, where did it rush in? It rushed in right there in the front. It hits those coal bunkers, boom, creates a huge, massive explosion, and that explosion could have been, and more tthan likely was, the event that snapped the keel, because the keel already had a ton of pressure on it. So now you have all this pressure on it, and I'm not saying exactly that, because I without being able to go back in time or being able to lift the ship and do some sort of forensics or stuff on it. And by now, most of the ship is just it's beyond being able to pull out of the seabed or anything. It would just fall apart. So it's really hard to know without going back in time. But from what I can gather and what I've been able to see, my theory is, yes, and obviously there was some sort of explosion. There are witnesses that said there was an explosion. So it was some sort of explosion, whether it was a bomb or it was the seawater coming in, hitting one of the smoldering coal fire, and boom, there was some sort of explosion that rocked the ship. And it looks like that explosion helped snap and seal the fate of the ship, because that explosion snapped the keel. And once that keel was snapped and she started taking on more and more water, even if the keel snapped right in the beginning, the ship wouldn't have ripped right in half. First, it would have had to have taken on water. Once she started to take on water and the bow starts to go down, she starts to go underwater, she starts to get heavier and heavier. Now who knows, maybe the explosion didn't initially snap the keel. Maybe the explosion let up, and a few minutes later it was just too much pressure. But I really do believe, from what I've researched, that there was an explosion. There's enough evidence to show that there was, and the explosion was one of the final factors, the nail in the coffin, if you will, of the ship. And then the keel snapped, and the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Why is the Titanic the most celebrated shipwreck? They go so far to make romantic movies about it. They make you feel like that is the only maritime tragedy that ever happens. Isn't something fishy about that too?
Well, if you want to cover up a murder, you have to create a backstory, right? You have to create a cover story. And with something like the Titanic, it is a major event. It's something big that, just like 9/11 will always do, or the Kennedy assassination and other events, Oklahoma City, every however many years, every 10 years from the event, whenever it's a 20-year anniversary, 40-year anniversary, 15-year, whenever it's, an anniversary, there's, especially like in this case, it was the 100th year anniversary of the Titanic. If I remember correctly, when the movie Titanic came out, if I remember correctly, it was somewhere around like the 75th anniversary of it. So they choose these specific anniversaries. They know people are gonna, it's the 75th anniversary of the Titanic. They understand how humans work, and they understand our nature better than we do. And they understand that people are gonna start poking around again, perhaps getting interested in it again. So if you create a blockbuster of a movie, if you create the romantic love story part of it, you can control the narrative. And then now people are going to go, they know people are going to look into it anyway, so if they can control the whole narrative and get you to look into the heart of the ocean aspect, and the Leonardo DiCaprio, we love him so much, Leo, don't let me go, Rose. If you fall into that, right, and you chase after the emotional aspect of it, you're not going to pay attention to the logical aspect like you do. You're not going to sit back and go, well, they didn't teach me about J.P. Morgan not getting on the ship right before it sent off to sea and mysteriously sunk. And hey, this is the same guy that screwed over Nikola Tesla, and he's part of the Federal Reserve. And hey, wait a minute, this is something shady here. I mean, you're 12 and you can figure this out, and I know 50-year-olds that couldn't figure this out. So kudos to you, and again, kudos to your mom for raising such a smart child, and your father too. Your parents have done an amazing job raising you, Natalie. You're an amazing young lady.
Thank you very much, Popeye. We learned a little bit about the Titanic in school, but they wanted us to watch the movie. Like the movie had all the facts right. They told us this was going to be a long subject. But the only thing we had to do was to build a ship. I got graded on it, but they forgot to tell us about the mass murder that happened on that ship. So, I made a nice model ship with cardboard, tape, paint, and I made Play-Doh light boats. I made more light boats than the actual ship because I wanted to save all the lives. That is all we learned about the Titanic in school. Do you wonder why we have a zombie generation, Popeye?
Oh, I know why you have a zombie generation, but you young lady are the future of, you are the key to the future, because you and people like you, and it's nice to see, it's encouraging to see the youth of today stepping up and trying to wake up their peers, because as you said, most kids don't know this stuff. I found it amazing that you had even wanted to talk to me about the Titanic. That most kids your age are interested in just mundane garbage, Justin Bieber or whatever other useless, mindless garbage they pump out into your little heads. And you're interviewing Jim Mars, you're asking me about the Titanic. You are the future, and you are the key to the future. Kids like you who are willing to ask the questions that nobody even knows to ask. See, it's not even asking the questions that are hard. That's a given. That's what a journalist is supposed to do. But you ask the questions that no one even knows to ask, and that's what's important, because that means that there's something that exists and more information that exists out there than your peers, and you choose to bring it to others. That's amazing. So you really, I'm telling you, you give me hope. You give me hope for the future. I know I'm doing the right thing, because obviously there's a younger generation. It's you guys that are going to pick up the mantle from my generation when we're older. Mm-hmm. So it makes me proud to know that there's kids like you out there. Well done.
Thank you so much. There's no words to actually thank you. I am making a change. It's very good to make a change, because you have to stand up, and that's the way to make a change, through the children, and that's the way we're going to make a change. If you want to make a change, it's through the children, and that's what I'm really doing, to help the children and to make changes across the world, because there's so many problems that has happened throughout history, and it's still happening over and over again and over and over again. We are just sitting here like bumps in a log. We should get up and fight and talk about what we really believe in.
Well, look what's happened since we haven't done that. People could say, Natalie, why is the sinking of the Titanic important at all? Why would you even want to talk about this? Because I've gotten that question. And to those that would even ask that, I say it's of major importance, because this is one event in a series of events that have occurred throughout history, and it's the same playbook used by the very same people. Whether it's the very same people to a physical T, or their proteges, or their children, their progeny, whatever, their people that they take under their wing and they teach to be these little psychopaths, whatever the case is, they pass this information on. It's still the same agenda. And it is very important to know about the Titanic. It is super important to know about this stuff. I couldn't tell you how important it is to know about it. And I get questioned all the time, who really cares, dude? It was 100 years ago. Well, this is something that precipitated the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, which has created so much of the misery and suffering that we know today. So if I am to understand how to fix a problem, I have to understand how the problem was created to begin with. Mm-hmm. And that means understanding the entire event, no matter how much time it takes, no matter how much minutia there is to it. That's just how I am. I'm the kind of person, since I was a little kid, when I used to get Christmas presents, I used to take my Tonka toys and stuff apart and then put them back together to figure out how they operate. And that's still how I do things. I still dissect things in my head that way. Mm-hmm. And in order for me to, that's how once I understand how it operates and it functions, then I can figure out, if I realize that it's something wrong with it, or if it's negative, then I could, at least if I know how it operates, I can work against it properly. But if I don't know how it operates, if I don't know what it's mechanically capable of, right, then I don't know. Well, same thing with looking at this dark New World Order agenda and these that I call them the powers that shouldn't be, the people behind the scenes, the puppet masters. You have to kind of take the same approach to them. You have to look at it and you have to understand completely how they work in order to be able to comprehend the things that you talk about. I mean, I go pretty dark and deep with some of the stuff that I talk about in my radio show. But for a 12-year-old, you're amazingly intelligent. But even for somebody that looks into this, you really know a lot about this stuff. And again, kudos to your mom, because she kind of breaks it down into pieces for you and lets you take it as a section to kind of, absorb it. Because this is a lot. This is a lot to take in. Like, when you first got into this, I'll bet you were amazed when you first started looking into this, right? The more things that started leading you down, the more paths you started going down. Weren't you like, wow?
Yes, I was, surely. It was very shocking to find a lot of information, because you never expect it. Because in school, right, like I used to be in school, right, before I started my radio show and got homeschooled, right, it was so, like, you're almost like, in a little hole, and then after you come out of this hole, and then you see all this darkness, and it's hard to see. Like, it was kind of difficult to see, like, hard to believe. But at least I awoken, and at least now I'm out of the hole, and now I am learning. Like your radio show is called Down the Rabbit Hole. It surely is Down the Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, and it's it's a scary trip. I know sometimes the stuff that you'll come across, or maybe your listeners will come across, sounds kooky and scary, but you know what? It's better that you guys are armed with that information and know than not know, because either way, you're still going to have to face the same problem, and I guess if you want to personify it and anthropomorphize it, the same monster, So it's better to know the monster exists and know what it's capable of, and being able to take on that monster, armed with knowledge, than not even know the thing exists and get blindsided by it. So I think it's important that kids do research this stuff. This is true history. I mean, it's more important to learn this than it is to worry about Dancing with the Stars or any of the other garbage that they feed you guys. I don't even know what the newest stuff is, because I don't watch television anymore, to be quite honest with you.
Me too. James Cameron called the Titanic wreck a crime scene. Could you tell my audience more about that?
That's actually an interesting quote. And when I did the broadcast with my friend Steve Stars, Steve brought that up. And that's actually a really interesting question. One has to wonder, why would Cameron say that the Titanic was a crime scene? What exactly made the Titanic a crime scene? What exactly was he talking about? And why, has he not gone further with that statement? And really, why is nobody hounding him? I know people have questioned him on it, but I don't really think he's ever explained in detail why exactly or what exactly he meant by it was a crime scene. To me, that means that he obviously knows enough about the backstory of the situation that either A, it was to kill these three guys. See, I think it was a mix of two things. I think it was they wanted to kill at least three individuals, if not maybe more, but at least three prominent individuals who would have stood in the way of the formation of the Federal Reserve, including John Jacob Astor. And there was Guggenheim and Isidore Straus. So these three guys would have stood in the way of the formation of a Federal Reserve System. So you have that side to it, right? But they like to kill two birds with one stone. They like to get more than one thing out of an event like this. So they put them on a ship that they know they're going to sink anyway, because the insurance money and everything else. So what aspect was Cameron talking about when he said that? That's a really good question. And that's something I myself haven't been able to get an answer to yet, because the only way to get an answer would be able to actually sit down and ask James Cameron. I wouldn't want to try to ask somebody that maybe wrote an article about it. I'd want to go right to the source on it and ask him, what did you mean? And I would ask him, I wouldn't even put any information in his head. If I had the chance, I would ask him and say, what did you mean by that statement? And then I would let him answer. And then if it didn't, if it was some cockamamie garbage, then I would, respond with, well, what about this and this and this? But I would be interested to hear why he called it a crime scene, and I don't think he would throw out some garbage, because he's pretty experienced with doing diving and stuff, especially from that movie. And I know he's actually researched the Titanic in depth. I would say he knows what he's talking about. So not that I praise Cameron for his movies or anything. I really don't like any of his other movies, but at least his newer stuff. But if he is saying that the Titanic was a crime scene, the level of knowledge he has on the incident and of having gone down there and being in submersibles and stuff, I would have to say one has to take that seriously. And again, the only way we'll ever know is really if somebody could ask him, what he meant. Maybe he'll talk to you because you're such a pleasant young lady. Maybe if you email James Cameron for an interview, you can sneak that one in there. You can tell me you want to interview him about Avatar or something, and you can, in the middle of the conversation, you can be like, hey, what'd you mean about when you said the Titanic was a crime scene? Because that would be a really good question to ask him. I would like to know myself. But I mean, obviously he knows that something shady happened, right? So it's just a matter of, is he talking about the insurance side of it? Is he talking about killing these 3 guys to stop the formation of the Federal Reserve? Is he talking about both? Makes one wonder. Mm-hmm. Good question. Very good question, Natalie.
Yeah, it is. I don't think you would actually say yes to my interview request.
But Titanic was truly the symbol of us losing a good lifestyle. If the Titanic didn't sink, we could have had a better monetary system. Nikola Tesla would have given us free energy. We could have had a different sort of society, not like the zombie society that we have today. And maybe World War I and World War II would have not happened. No one has the right to hurt or murder another individual.
That's right. No one does. And you are 100% correct with the fact that the Titanic was a huge event in the downfall of our economic system from the time what it was to what it is now, and the country as a whole and the people of the country. It was very detrimental. It did not help anybody at all, because it led to what we know today as the Federal Reserve System, and that led to everyone's enslavement. And it doesn't mean that if the Titanic hadn't happened that they wouldn't have tried another way or some other way of forming it. They would have. But again, it would have been a new path that we were unable to even go down because the ship mysteriously sunk. And like I said, I think it hit investigating it too. What's ironic, there is a bit of an irony in this whole thing. The iceberg that it hit, it was kind of like Murphy's Law that it hit the iceberg. They weren't supposed to hit that iceberg. That's why it was like another monkey wrench in that whole plan, that the ship was supposed to land on, again, according to perfect plan, they were hoping to park the front of the ship up on this ice shelf, unload people off the ship, and then they could let the ship sink, and the ship it really wouldn't sink until they pulled it off the ice shelf, and then it would so they would have time to get everybody off. So I don't really think that he planned again to hit the iceberg they hit. That was kind of like Murphy's Law. They're in an ice field and they're headed for this huge ice shelf, and of course they hit an iceberg on the way to the ice shelf, and it was not that had a lot to play with why the other ship didn't come in and they weren't in the right position that they were supposed to be in, because they were a few miles away from where they were supposed to be, and Murphy's Law, they hit the iceberg. So not everything goes well. A well-laid plan does not always go well, but it still served their interest, because eventually the ship sunk. The certain people they wanted to die died, and they got the insurance money for the ship. So if it was an insurance scam / murder, they got, it didn't matter if it came out a little sloppy. They were able to handle the investigation into it later on. And if you want to see, I say this all the time on my radio show, if your listeners really want to tell if an event is shady or not, even if it wasn't staged, because remember, sometimes events aren't staged. It's a real event, but then the media spins how the event happened, and the narrative is sometimes twisted and changed for the powers that shouldn't be their agenda. And then you have events that happen that are just completely fictitious and they've never happened at all, and they're made up and they're used to push a certain agenda. And that you'll see that with everything from you have 9/11 to mass shootings. Any of these big events always seem to serve the agenda of this group, the powers that shouldn't be. And again, they're all interrelated when you start to look at it. And you put it very eloquently before, J.P. Morgan, that guy, anytime your listeners hear his voice or hear his name, anytime your listeners hear the name J.P. Morgan, you should, or instantly they should think red flag, warning, 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 something shady. Anytime. And the more you research things, anything from the Titanic to 9/11 to the economy to the Federal Reserve, anything, J.P. Morgan keeps coming up. And when you think J.P. Morgan, think J.P. Morgan Chase. When you think J.P. Morgan Chase, think who runs Chase Bank, the Rockefeller family. And then who are the Rockefellers a branch of? The Rothschild family. You see how it's all interconnected? Ding, ding, ding. And it's all these elitist, rich banking families.
Follow the money.
Yes. See? Exactly. Follow the money. And what happened the day of the Titanic? One of the big money names, Mr. J.P. Morgan himself, like you said earlier, hopped off.
Thank you for coming on to Crystal Lake Kids Radio. It was truly a pleasure having you on my radio show, and I hope to have you back on my radio show in the near future.
Natalie, it was an honor being on your radio show, and I would be pleased to come back whenever you want to have me on. It was a blast. You are a very, very enlightened young lady, and your parents did an awesome job raising you so far, and you give me hope for the future. And I know when I play the interview, because I'm gonna put the interview that when you put it up on your YouTube channel, I'm gonna copy it and I'm gonna put it up on my YouTube channel so my listeners can listen to the interview, and I'm gonna put it in my archives as well. And when my listeners get a chance to listen to you just speak and even ask me questions, they'll have the same hope that I do, because just the fact that a 12-year-old young lady is asking me the deep questions that you're even asking me shows that we still have a chance. I thought most of the younger generations were completely retarded, but you've given me hope.
Thank you so much, Popeye. Thank you for coming onto my radio show, and thank you for all your kind words. You're truly a gentleman.
You're welcome, Natalie.